My Weird School Days, Book Number 5. Officer Spence Makes No Sense. Written by Dan Gutman. Pictures by Jim Pellot. Chapter 7. You can't say but in a children's book. Well, it was sure shaping up to be an exciting day at elementary school. First, our teacher and vice principal were sent to jail. Then our teacher was arrested. We didn't have much time to think about it because we had to go to reading class with our reading specialist, Mr. Mackey. I hate to read, but sometimes it's fun because Mr. Mackey is wacky. Open your books, page 34, Mr. Mackey said. Today we're going to read a story called The Happy Bunny. Don't you just love bunnies? Yes, yelled all the girls. No, yelled all the boys. Bixby the bunny was a happy little bunny. Mr. Mackey read from the book. He loved to eat carrots and chase butterflies and frolic in the morning sun. But then one day, Mr. Mackey didn't have the chance to finish his sentence because the strangest thing in the history of the world happened. Officer Spence burst into the room. Freeze, dirtbag, he yelled. Step away from that book, and nobody gets hurt, Mackey. Gasp! Everybody gasped. What's the problem? Asked Mr. Mackey. I was just reading The Happy Bunny to the kids. What did I do wrong? Don't act all innocent, shouted Officer Spence. That story has the word but in it. So? Emily said. What's wrong with the word but? Asked Mr. Mackey. Don't play cute with me, mister, shouted Officer Spence. I know what you meant. What did he mean? Asked Michael. B-U-T-T, spelled out Officer Spence. And you can't use the word B-U-T-T in a children's book. I didn't say B-U-T-T, explained Mr. Mackey. I said B-U-T. Sounds like B-U-T-T to me, said Officer Spence. Sort of like tofu and tofu, I pointed out. Quiet, Arlo, said Andrea. This is serious. She was right, because Officer Spence went out in the hall and came back in, wheeling another one of those portable jail cells. Wait a minute, Mr. Mackey said. What's wrong with the word but anyway? It's just a body part. Officer Spence stopped and glared at Mr. Mackey from way too close to his face. Just a body part, he said. It's the body part you sit on. So that makes it bad. We can't have potty mouths like you teaching young children. If kids think it's okay to say B-U-T-T, they might start saying other body parts, like E-L-B-O-W or E-A-R-L-O-B-E. And we can't have that. Look for yourself, Mr. Mackey said, holding up the Happy Bunny. It doesn't even say B-U-T-T. It says B-U-T. It was a typo, Officer Spence said. They meant to write B-U-T-T. They forgot the second T. This is ridiculous, said Mr. Mackey. I'm sure lots of books have that word in them. Lots of people rob banks, Officer Spence said. You think that makes it right? Get in the cell, Mackey. But you said it again, Officer Spence yelled as he pushed Mr. Mackey into the jail cell. And you call yourself a reading specialist? How do you sleep at night? You disgust me. I didn't do anything, Mr. Mackey shouted. I'm an innocent man. You have the right to remain silent, said Officer Spence. So shut up. No, let me out. Chapter 8. Mrs. Cooney is busted. What a weird day it was. Officer Spence was arresting grown-ups, left and right. After reading, we had to go to the nurse's room for health. Our school nurse is Mrs. Cooney. She has eyes that look like cotton candy, and she is beautiful. She wanted to marry me a while back, but I told her I wouldn't marry her because she's already married to some guy named Mr. Cooney. Mrs. Cooney was teaching us about hygiene. You should wash your hands every time you use the bathroom, she told us. That will prevent the spread of germs that make us. She didn't have the chance to finish her sentence because that's when Officer Spence burst into the room. Freeze, dirtbag, he yelled. What's the meaning of this? Asked Mrs. Cooney, putting her hands up. I didn't do anything. I want you to open that cabinet over the sink slowly, Officer Spence ordered. And then back away. No false moves, Cooney. Mrs. Cooney went and opened the cabinet over the sink. There were some bandages in there and some bottles of aspirin. Aha! Officer Spence hollered. Aspirin! Can you get that stuff in a drugstore? Well, yes, of course, Mrs. Cooney said. Just as I suspected, Officer Spence shouted. You're a drug dealer. What? You're handing out drugs to innocent children, Officer Spence yelled as he wheeled in a portable jail cell. You should be ashamed of yourself. How do you sleep at night? I take NyQuil, Mrs. Cooney said. Get in the cell, Cooney, and nobody gets hurt. But I didn't. You have the right to remain silent, yelled Officer Spence. So shut up. No, help! Let me go! Are you going to do a full-scale investigation? I asked. There's the scale. Quiet, you, said Officer Spence. He told us to be on our best behavior while he wheeled Mrs. Cooney's jail cell over to where the other arrested grown-ups were. So as soon as he left the room, me and Michael and Ryan got up and shook our butts at the class. Most of the kids laughed, except for little Miss I Never Do Anything Wrong. You know, you shouldn't be joking around, Arlo, Andrea said. This whole thing is your fault. My fault? I said. What did I do? If you had checked your lunchbox before coming to school, you would have noticed that your sandwich was missing, said Andrea. Then none of this would have happened. I hate Andrea. We were all sitting there in the nurse's office without any grown-ups. I looked at Michael. Michael looked at Ryan. Ryan looked at Andrea. Andrea looked at Emily. Emily looked at Neil the nude kid. We were all looking at each other. Maybe Officer Spence isn't a real security guard, I said. Did you ever think of that? Yeah, Michael said. Maybe he kidnapped a real security guard and has him locked up in a cage, just like he's locking up all the teachers. Stuff like that happens all the time, you know. Stop trying to scare Emily, said Andrea. Emily looked like she was going to cry, as usual. Officer Spence is crazy, Ryan said. There's no telling what he'll do next. He might put us all in jail, said Neil the nude kid. We've got to do something, Emily said, and then she went running out of the room. Well, at least we got rid of her. She is such a crybaby. Emily was right, said Neil. We've got to do something. What can we do? Call the police? Asked Andrea. Officer Spence is the police. Andrea was right for once in her life. There was nothing we could do. That's when I got the greatest idea in the history of the world. On the wall in the nurse's office is a little red box that says fire. In case of emergency, break glass. Are you thinking what I'm thinking? I said to the guys. Yeah, said the guys. Is this an emergency? I asked. Definitely, said the guys. Arlo, don't, Andrea yelled. She tried to stop me, but I was too fast for her. I pulled the fire alarm. Chapter 9. Officer Spence is getting weirder. Bring, 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 bring. Fire alarm bells always go bring. Bring, bring, bring. Nobody knows why. It was really loud. We had to hold our hands over our ears. Everybody was freaking out. It was cool. Get outside! People were screaming in the hallways. Fire! Everybody outside! When we got out to the playground, it was like a war zone. Officer Spence had put barbed wire on top of the fence. There was a helicopter hovering over the school. Officer Spence was wearing a camouflage suit, and he was running around with a weird helmet over his face. What's that he's wearing? Ryan asked. Night vision goggles, Michael told us. They let you see in the dark. I saw them in a movie once. Night vision goggles are cool, I said. But why is he wearing night vision goggles in the middle of the day? Asked Neil. Because he's crazy, Andrea said. Officer Spence was running around, arresting every grown-up he could find. First, he ran over to our science teacher, Mr. Docker. Freeze, dirtbag, he yelled. What did I do? Asked Mr. Docker. You're conducting bizarre experiments in the science lab, Officer Spence said. You're under arrest. He put handcuffs on Mr. Docker. Then he ran over to our bus driver, Mrs. Cornwall. Freeze, dirtbag! What did I do? She asked. I saw you drinking and driving, accused Officer Spence. It was coffee, said Mrs. Cornwall. Yes, and you were drinking it, Officer Spence said as he handcuffed her. Drinking and driving is against the law, so you're under arrest. Then he ran over to our crossing guard, Mr. Louis. He was holding his guitar that looks like a stop sign. Freeze, dirtbag. Hey man, said Mr. Louis, making a peace sign. Can't we all learn to love one another and live in peace and harmony? No, Officer Spence barked. You're under arrest. Hey, I'm just chillin', dude, Mr. Louis said. Doing my thing. Can you dig it? Why are you hassling me, bro? Because you stand out in the middle of the street before and after school, Officer Spence said. Yeah, that's my job, man, Mr. Louis said. Like I'm a crossing guard? I gotta help the kids cross the street. It's what I do. Can you dig where I'm coming from? You're a jaywalker, Officer Spence yelled. And you're going to jail. Oh, man, Mr. Louis said as he was handcuffed. Lighten up, dude. Like, you're giving off bad vibes and bumming everybody out. You have the right to remain silent, said Officer Spence. So shut up. No, like, help. Let me go.